Okay, good afternoon. I think we're going to get started now because we've got quite a lot to get through and we want to make sure we've got plenty of time for questions at the end. So welcome everyone to this one-off extra session of London Sport and the Mayor of London's Talking COVID and Sport webinar series. This series was originally delivered fortnightly during the summer by London Sport in partnership with the community sport team at the Mayor of London's office. And it was designed to help the London's community sports sector to address some of the challenges that are being experienced as a result of the COVID-19 lockdown measures. As we're in a second England-wide lockdown, we thought it sensible to add another webinar to discuss current experiences and concerns. So I'm Lauren Kosher. I'm Senior Programme Delivery Manager within the Community Sport team at the Mayor of London's office. As chair of today's webinar, I'd like to just share some quick housekeeping notes with you. So firstly, if you could all just make sure you keep your microphones on mute, make sure your videos are turned off. I'm sure we've all had plenty of Zoom calls now, so we know the drill. This is just because we have a lot of people on the call, so it will help with sound quality and minimise distractions. We will be recording this session to send out to a wider audience as well. So firstly, as an introduction, Talking COVID-19 and Sport is an initiative that was developed in response to the crisis to address the biggest issues facing London's physical activity and community sports sector at this time, and to offer practical advice. Each webinar was led by a representative from the Mayor of London's community sport team and a representative from London Sport. And for each webinar, we brought in external industry expertise to provide wider insight on the topic. All of the webinars were delivered through Zoom. However, we are conscious of the accessibility challenges that webinars can present. So the post-session recording is always released with subtitles, and that will be the same in this case. You can find all the previous webinar recordings on the London Sport website. In today's webinar, we'll be exploring the challenges faced during this latest period of national restriction. As we know, every part of England is now under the same coronavirus restrictions, which will apply until Wednesday, the 2nd of December. And we do not have a clear picture of what the restrictions will look like following this date. The new restrictions have many implications, of course, for sport and physical activity, which we'll be discussing today. And the four organisations speaking today, the Greater London Authority, SportEd, Sport England and London Sport, have all been meeting throughout the COVID-19 lockdown as part of a London coordination group to help inform the sector's responses to COVID-19 in the capital. So as you can see, to deliver this topic, I'm joined by three speakers. First is Lorna Leach, a Strategy Relationship Manager at London Sport. Lorna will be presenting the major themes and topics submitted in the latest wave of lockdown queries to London Sport. We're also joined by Warren Lee, Strategic Lead for Local Delivery at Sport England, who will give reflections on the main concerns of the sector from a Sport England perspective. And finally, Chris Sawyer, Strategic Lead for London at SportEd. And Chris will provide the reflections from community stakeholders. So thank you for joining us. In terms of running order, for the first half of the webinar, we will hear from our speakers, firstly Lorna, then Warren and Chris. And then the second half of the webinar will be for our Q&A. So we do have some pre-submitted questions, and of course, as Chris has said on the chat, you are welcome to submit your questions in the Q&A section, or you can submit privately to myself or to my colleague Paulina, and I will make sure that we pose these questions during the Q&A. You can start submitting your questions throughout the presentation. Hopefully we will get through them all, but if not, we will endeavour to get back to you following the webinar. So let's get started, and I'd like to hand over first to Lorna.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So I'm going to start by talking through some of the major challenges that we're having attached to lockdown. And I think the first one of our big themes this time round has been fairly similar to last time round, which is how do we navigate the guidance and applying that guidance to the reality that individual organisations are facing. In the first lockdown, that was all to do with how does the leisure sector reopen, how does sports restart, understanding distancing, practicalities of managing that. This time round, the confusion has predominantly been around what does the government guidance mean when it talks about education and wraparound services. And it can be hugely frustrating to be a community organisation and not have answers immediately to the situation you're in. But we've learned really quickly how national agencies can come together and approach the right government departments to get the answers. And in this case, the Youth Sport Trust, Sport and Rec Alliance, UK Active and AFBI came together with government departments to clarify what extracurricular support is permitted. And it means, in this case, that schools can continue to provide extracurricular activity so long as it matches the school's COVID-19 protocols around staffing, bubbles for different year groups, social distancing, and has got an appropriate risk assessment in place. It means that you can't have activity that brings different groups together. So if the school's policy is bubbles by year group, you can't deliver extracurricular activity that brings different year groups together, and you can't do it if it brings young people from different schools together. So they've really clarified that particular challenge around guidance, and that will be an ongoing issue with all guidance as it develops clarification of areas, which your national agency will always help you find the answers to those solutions. So continue to raise the questions when you don't understand what it means for your scenario. The second area that has come round both times has been community level provision and the service survival of that provision. Greenhouse just released a report on the last 6 months of lockdown and community groups and how they've responded to the crisis. And it's been quite an interesting read. Initially, around about 62% of community groups paused activities during the first lockdown, and that rose to 91% when you start looking at sport. And that means a loss of income. It means reduction in volunteers available to be able to support any services that is still being provided. On the flip side to that, ever more need for community provision, particularly in disadvantaged communities. And the community groups themselves have responded incredibly creatively, incredibly resourceful. And I think all the panel members here would say that that is something they have also seen, that resilience to the situation at hand. Right now, community groups are most worried about being able to continue in the future. They see themselves as important to recovery, but are also really concerned about if they can actually survive to get to that point. And what they need more than anything is funding, particularly funding that is not as restrictive as previously. So previously it's quite hard to get funding that would allow just core provision of activity that they would do day to day. And community groups need access to funding that allows that loss of income to be offset. But community groups are also accessing funding for new activities because they're closer to their communities than ever before, and they're adapting their offer to better support what the community needs in this immediate moment. So they've also needed access to funding for that. And then the third key area that we're seeing a lot of requests for support and information around is access to space and the displacement of communities from the spaces they used to use. And what I mean by that is, as we came out of the first lockdown, if you look at leisure centres and sports halls, there's a balance between the financial business running costs to those facilities and the activities that they need to provide to be able to at least start to cope with those costs. So they're looking for the activities that require the least amount of staff head count, because there's a number of people that are allowed within the space, and that's the limit, and that includes staff and participants. But they're also looking for how to make the best use of the space they've got so that they can have as many participants in. So we saw gyms spreading into sports halls, which meant sports hall activity having to stop. We saw exercise classes returning, but not for groups where we potentially have to have additional support. So disability groups that require carers to be part of the group were less likely to return during the last lockdown, and they'll be less likely to return as this lockdown shifts as well. And it's been really important for us to start to look at how do we open up other spaces, even if just temporarily, to be able to accommodate some of those groups and allow them to continue to be physically active, because they're the groups that probably need that additional provision more than anyone else, particularly when it comes to some of the challenges around mental health. So those have been the three sort of main issues. Chris, can you drop to the next slide for me, please? Thank you. But the good news is almost everything that was available the first time round is still relevant and accessible, and there was lots and lots of really clever, really innovative resource that was developed for all kinds of different scenarios of type of organisation, type of participant, whether you're at home, whether you're able to get out and about a bit. There's so much that's been developed, and I won't touch on too much of it, but a lot of it's on Sport England's website, and Warren will go through that a bit later in the presentation. But when you start looking at some of the stuff that London Sport and the GLA have been able to do, our role has really been able to identify the gaps in what knowledge is already out there and test things that give the answers to those questions and develop the resources that support them. So a great bit of work that GLA did earlier in the year was around funding a project over in Hackney, based in a school, but in a school site, but working with 2 community organisations to basically test returning to play in a community setting, and unpick all of those tricky questions around which guidance takes prevalence over which guidance. Is it the NGB guidance or the school guidance? Understanding what it actually means to manage a session and keep social distancing in place, depending on the age group, depending on the standard of the young people in attendance, how to manage family groups, how to manage access and egress. So it's all kinds of really technical details, and all of that has been turned into a really great report, loads of templates and resources. So if you're thinking about how do I come out of this lockdown, you can go to that and use that to support it. In the same way, London Sport have done some work around understanding what it's like to be a community group, delivering sport whilst your entire participant group are all at home, and how do you interact with all of that. So we've released a little blog that goes through some of the basics that the community groups we supported identified when they were trying to establish that connection the first time round. So there's lots of things out there that can kind of inspire people who feel a bit stuck at how to deal with the current challenges within lockdown. We've also got some really great resources out there attached to finding guidance really quickly, because if you've ever been stuck in a supermarket and looking at all the things in front of you and going, which one's the right one for the issue I've got, the thing I want to make or use, there's a lot of options out there. So what we've got in place is our NGB guidance, so you can come along and find out their latest release on what is allowed and how to manage that. We've also got resources that connect you through to things like the Sport England pages to help you narrow down the direction you go in. And we've got that in place with funding. Funding is a huge issue, as I mentioned earlier, and the London funders have done a great job at pulling together different funding partners from across London, collecting all of that money into the Community Response Fund and releasing waves of funding that are related to the world in play right there and then. So we've just had wave 4 released, and that's responding to the fact that we've gone back into lockdown. So we've also got on our website funding guidance to be able to help you navigate through different options. So the London Funders Community Response Fund is one of them, but there are other options out there. And the final thing that we're doing that's I think is really important, particularly if you can't align yourself to a national agency where you know that the guidance they provide will help you, we at London Sport do a central query support. So if you've got a question about your specific scenario, how do I navigate finding the solution to that, you can ask us and we'll take the time to coordinate an answer that helps you go directly to the thing you need, rather than having to navigate the sort of slightly more confusing world of options around you. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Lorna. That was really helpful. Thank you. We've already had a lot of questions on funding, so we will come back to that. But firstly, I'll hand over to Warren now. Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren, and good afternoon, everybody. So, yeah, as Lauren says, I'm Warren Lee from Sport England, and I am the strategic lead in the local delivery directorate. What I plan to do, I've just got 5 minutes, is a quick run through of the guidance, funding and support that's available. A lot of it available on our website, and then we might potentially use some of the Q&A depending on what questions come in, if people want to dig deeper on any of those. And next slide, please, Chris. And this may be stating the obvious, really, because I know you'll all be more than familiar with some of these. Let me just rearrange my screen slightly. You'll all be a number of familiar with the differences between the initial lockdown and the national lockdown that we're currently in. I've just picked out a few rather than read off all of them. But for me, the schools are open again is a really big one. as the dad of an 11-year-old boy, that I see how much of a difference that's making in terms of his activity levels, kind of from the original to now. As Lorna mentioned, the guidance is different around exercise outdoors, so we know that it is unlimited. It was previously 1 a day. You can do it with 1 person from another household. That brings its own challenges around the interpretations of the guidance around what can and can't be allowed versus the kind of rather more rigorous lockdown in phase 1, which I'll come on to in the next slide. And a really big one, and again, this is really stating the obvious, but I think any of us can just look out of our window and see that the weather is different now than it was in that particularly fine period in kind of April and May that we had, and that is actually steering a lot of the thinking that we're doing and what people are kind of concerned about over the coming months. So it sounds trite, but actually potentially is a really big difference between where we are now and where we're in earlier in the spring. Next slide, please, Chris. Very, very quickly on guidance, and again, I'm sure you'll be more familiar. A number of you will be more familiar with the kind of the detail of the guidance than I am. But we do have guidance, a summary on our website. We also have a page of FAQs, and we have links to the government guidance. And the only additional thing I would say, rather than saying there's a lot of information there, is that it really is changing on a regular basis. So through discussions with colleagues across London, I've fed through a few queries to the team leading on developing the guidance and the FAQs. So we are frequently raising queries that come in via community sports organisations with DCMS and then revisiting the guidance as a result. So an example of some that came in last week were around some queries on school sport, what was permissible, what wasn't, and also what the kind of the boundaries were on support groups. If activity was a part of a core part of providing support to some members of those support groups, what was permissible, what wasn't permissible. So the FAQs are being regularly updated as a result of that. And on that last one in particular, I think there'll be something going up on the next few days. Next slide, thanks, Chris. Funding and research together in these two, and I know it sounds like I've not looked at them yet. It sounds like there's already a few questions in the chat around funding. So I won't talk about the funding that kind of as part of the initial response, I guess. Again, a number of you will be familiar with that, and there's information on the website. But I think the most recent one was the Return to Play Fund. And again, lots more information on the website. You can click through on there when you receive the slides. But I'll just talk to them a few very, very quickly. The small grants for fund element of that forms £10 million, and that small grants, that's between £300 to £10,000, and that is around supporting sport and activity groups, clubs and organisations to the immediate challenges. So that's things like having to deliver activity in smaller groups, correct hygiene, correct safety equipment. So so if you're not familiar with that already, do have a look at the website if that might be applicable to your organisation. And moving over to kind of the facility element, there is also the Community Asset Fund, which will be a pot of £5 million. And again, that's around, I guess the slightly more significant adaptations that might be required to open up important places within the guidance and make them accessible to the local community, or improve ventilation is another example of that. Quick glance at the time. And finally, the Active Together is a pot of 1.5 million, which talks you through some potential steps to use some crowdfunding campaigns and initiatives, and there's a kind of a match funding element to those. Very, very quickly on the research, and again, a number of you will be familiar with this, but we've had the COVID-19 briefing, jumping to the second bullet there, that's been going on since the initial lockdown. So I think we're now almost up to 200 pages, because what it does is it builds every fortnight that the data is updated, it builds. So it's got a really rich story of the impact of the various restrictions and on activity levels. So, some really good potentially kind of insight data analysis that may be of interest and applicable. And then kind of summarising that with the activity tracker on the website. And that allows, it's really, really good, simple tool, just allows you to click, filter, You can look at things by, in some instances, by region, in terms of the different kind of uptake, impacts on physical activity levels, or by demographic groups on there as well. And final slide, Chris. And then, as Lorna said, there is an absolute wealth of resources and materials that have been kind of captured over the last, I guess, 6 to 9 months, and they kind of continue to be developed. I mentioned the weather at the outset, and the autumn winter activity toolkit was released a few weeks ago, and it has lots of resources about how you can run local campaigns, about what we'll be doing nationally, about about potential ways you can kind of adapt existing activity for winter, and kind of lots of data supporting that as well. And again, I won't talk through all of these, but I did have a look at the activity timetable. So for tomorrow, I stopped counting at this 39 different activities online. You know, I know there's challenges there around digital exclusion, but 39 activities, that was before 10 o'clock tomorrow. Some of them have a cost. There are others, like the one that our parks run, that are free. So, as Lorna mentioned, an absolute wealth of resources that is continually being built and developed. So I hope that's a good, quick kind of overview of what's available, and yeah, happy to dig deeper during some of the Q&A. Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you, Warren. Again, very helpful. And finally, I will pass on to Chris Sawyer.
Great, thanks, Lauren. So just in terms of my sort of 5 minutes or 6 minutes or so, I just wanted to split this into 3 parts, really, looking back on obviously lockdown 1, looking at what's affecting us now, but also really keen to look at what we think the support needs for the sector will be in the future. From the previous lockdown, the main themes and needs that emerged from our groups and our membership were obviously, and I'm sure this will echo and resonate with everybody on the call, was around those emergency funds, the fundraising needs, but also keeping participants physically active and engaged with the groups that, you know, are a key part of their life. There was also this need for moral support for the workforce, you know, those check-ins, those wellbeing calls that we certainly undertook in the early stages of that first lockdown. There was a clear need for clear communication, particularly from within the sector, around those practical guidance or guidelines and the advice that Lorna alluded to. And there was also this need for better connections and better links between local partners in communities to be able to serve those communities better. When we emerged from that lockdown, a lot of those priorities remained a focus for our members and for our staff as well over those past few months. We were supporting groups seeking funding support, reviewing those applications, connecting groups with our own volunteers. We were supporting members to look to diversify their offer as well, but also just looking at our core services and our core function around using this sort of downtime or that downtime to reflect a bit internally, put in place some appropriate plans, mechanisms and processes that allow the community groups and our members to build their own resilience for the future, so that should anything continue or further lockdowns come along, then everyone's in a slightly better place than they were perhaps the first time. This time around, I think there's a sense that it is a little different. You know, there's almost a sense that it was expected from within the community groups. It was perhaps only a matter of time before we saw ourselves in another lockdown. And with that comes an understandable nervousness about the potential for future lockdowns as well, because obviously it's impossible to predict from our side. I do believe, and I do get the sense that there is some comfort from within our groups and within our members that, you know, we've gone through a lockdown already, we've done this before, and in that vein there is a lot of good practice from that previous lockdown that Lorna alluded to earlier that could and indeed should be shared within the sector. That being said, there's one particular quote that we've received from a member we've spoken to who I think has accurately captured what certainly a lot of our members, and I'm sure a fair few on this call, thought with the announcement of that lockdown earlier this month. And this is a direct quote: "Well, this is another blow. Just as we are on our feet, we are shut again, and back to square one, looking for funds to help us whilst we are shut. We still have bills and now no income. I thought I'd left all this stress behind." I think that probably will resonate with quite a few people on this call, if not all. And with this lockdown, many of the same themes from the first lockdown remain true. You know, to echo Lorna's earlier point, initially there were those concerns regarding guideline confusion, which just emphasised the need for accessible, practical, and also regularly updated messaging to make sure that everyone's clear about what they can and can't do. There are obviously the financial concerns. Many groups are requiring that financial support again to get through this period, this month, facing closures and ceasing activity obviously for November, but also many are considering actually remaining closed until 2021. Even those groups who had received funding through the sort of return to play funds or the tackling inequality funding that were released through Sport England, plus also other funders, they've had to obviously seek clarification from those funders on flexibility adaptations, which I'm glad many have been able to find out and get approval on. Again, there's this increased focus on the virtual world, reverting to online delivery where groups can do so, moving those club sessions to virtual engagements, even if it's just to remain connected to the participants whilst they can't actually do the activity themselves. I think one of the strongest elements that's emerging for us, and one that we're really keen to play a role in, is around support and well-being. In addition to the concern that many groups have obviously for their participants, the physical and mental well-being of their participants, we're particularly concerned, and obviously it's the one that we see the most through our engagement with coaches, volunteers and group leaders, is the actual mental state of the workforce. At the end of the day, everyone is a human being working at the forefront of this, facing it day to day. They're worried about their own participants, they're worried about their own families. And as the quote alludes to, this second lockdown is a huge blow to groups who have just started to get back on their feet. And perhaps this time around, there's not so much of a sense of kind of gung-ho attitude, might not be as strong as it was before for the first lockdown. As a result, we're working across our regions, and certainly true within London, to engage as many of our members as possible and simply just have a chat, a sort of well-being call or a check-in, see how they're all doing, what the challenges are, and talk to them about any possible support that we can provide and give them a bit of a way forward. And then I think the final theme that's really emerging for us is around this future-proofing and planning for the future. Groups are obviously making those preparations to reopen in December or in the new year, depending on their circumstances, and obviously want to make sure that they're in the best place to do so. So considering how to deliver safely and obviously in adherence to any social distance requirements. But we want to make sure that we're working with groups on also utilising this pause to reflect internally, consider ways that they can improve or build on their own resilience. So reviewing their business plans, their strategic plans, their fundraising plans, building and maintaining those local partnerships and collaborations with an eye on the future. And then in leading me nicely into the sort of final section around the future, what I think will be particularly important moving forwards, and I think this is because we'll probably all agree that when we come out of this lockdown and any future lockdowns, the inequalities that existed before will persist, and if anything, the gaps will be far larger. So for us, the main themes or needs that we're seeing from our groups and our members is, yes, there's an element of funding and raising funds, but diversifying the sources of those funds. There's attracting and retaining those participants in activity, however that may be, and perhaps that is increasing on online provision and engagement, almost embedding elements of that within a core delivery. There's the whole piece of work around risk identification and risk management processes to make sure that groups and organisations are more resilient to whatever future circumstances we find ourselves in. But there is this also a huge emphasis on capturing impact and working with our members and groups to articulate the impact that they have within their communities and for their beneficiaries, which is incredibly important, obviously, given the link of that to fundraising and the need to raise those funds. And Sported, obviously, we're committed to continuing to hold more focus groups across our membership. It was actually decided sort of internally that we're doing a whole round of new focus groups with our members across the country this month to find out more about what groups are facing. And obviously, typically those are written up into a report, which we'll be happy to share and distribute through the channels, obviously linked into this webinar, so that you can all see the benefit of that. I think to end, because I think my 5 minutes are pretty much up, if not over, a bit of a call to action, really. I suppose if you are members of Sported, then please don't hesitate to get in touch. There is the London inbox email there, which one of my team will pick up. If you're not a member, then please, again, don't hesitate to check out the website, look at our content, look at our materials and support services, and speak to our membership teams about potential eligibility. It's a free service. Everything we provide is free, but we are here to help and hopefully build a stronger sector for the future, irrespective of what the pandemic has to offer. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much to all of our speakers. So we are going to all now be available for the Q&A. And please do continue to send your questions through. We have quite a few already, but hopefully we'll get through them all. So as I mentioned, there's already been a few about funding, understandably. So I wanted to go to those first, just to make sure we are picking up on everything we can. So firstly, there's a couple of questions about emergency funding, and in particular, if lockdown is extended or there are more lockdowns in the future, will we might not be able to answer this immediately, but if we can, great. Will there be funding for sport clubs that are struggling to survive if lockdown continues? So I know both Lorna and Warren, you talked about funding. I'll come to you first, Lorna, if that's okay, to see what you think.
Yeah, that's fine. It's hard to predict the future because we don't know what it'll look like. Having said that, the major funders and the behaviour that they've exhibited, so Sport England and Warren, I'll let you go into that, but Sport England's the funders that London Funders support, and ourselves when we issue funding, which isn't that often, but when we do, it's been responsive to the situation we find ourselves in. So if this continues to go on and continues to look like this, then the funding will do what it did the first time round, which is deal with the immediate response, because ultimately we can't, the investment can't go into things that are not going to support actually being there at the end of this for however long this goes on for. And we can't predict whether we'll come out of lockdown and go into tiers, and we can't predict whether we'll stay in lockdown for longer, or whether we'll go out of it, come back into it, go out of it, never return. We just don't know. But I would say the behaviour of funders has been to be less demanding on what you have to return, to be clearer about the fact that they are supporting the immediate needs of money that helps you survive right now, and that they are flexible to the world as it moves.
Great, thank you. Warren, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I mean, I guess like Lorna said, the real difficulty is we don't know what's going to happen in the spring. We don't know what's going to happen around the pandemic, and kind of, so inevitably it will be around. That's what makes it difficult to really kind of, be too clear in terms of responding to this. But I'd agree. I think there's a part of it is around at what stage can we have the discussion with government around moving the kind of response from supporting the crisis to future sustainability, but it still feels like we're still in that kind of crisis phase at the moment, but that will need to shift. A core part of our strategy, which is in development at the moment, is recover and reinvent. And that indicates to me that that is strongly linked to, obviously, to the kind of the COVID pandemic, which means it won't be going off our radar anytime soon. But can't be too specific in terms of how much money, when will that be? I don't know yet. But a bit like Lorna said, we'd be very surprised if that's not a part of our kind of offer going forward. But just a positive as well. I think the response from Oliver Dowden, and I had it open but I can't see it on my thinking now, but it was only a week ago when he was talking about sport and physical activity kind of being at the forefront when the lockdown's released, and that just gives me some hope that there's a bit of a shift in the kind of the government messaging around where sport and physical activity fits in the kind of the priority list. Again, who knows what will happen there, but that, just wanted to kind of have some positives in what can be, is a real kind of challenging time for everyone at the moment.
Great, thank you. Similarly, another question on the same kind of lines. So you might have kind of answered this already, but I just want to make sure it's covered. So we had a question about funding for small organisations with only one director, because they've found that funding isn't available for this kind of organisation, or it's hard to find it, and often funding is available for new projects and not just to cover kind of core running costs. So what is available right now for that kind of organisation and for the core costs, but also, do you see anything coming up in the future? And just I have a small answer for that, but you'll probably want to add to it. Just in terms of the London Community Response Fund, the Wave 4, which is currently out, can fund these organisations, but they tend to, well, according to the eligibility, they need at least 3 directors. However, if you haven't got 3 trustees, you can either apply through a host organisation or apply as is and then explain that you're a small user-led organisation in the appropriate section. So there are ways that you can apply for the LCRF fund. But yeah, is there any other kind of funding available?
I think
yeah.
on our website, and the slide sort of connects to it, we do have the ability to search funding, and you can put in things like that, some of those stipulations as to exactly what it is you're looking for and equally the kind of organisation you are. And we also have a funding specialist who is, she's obviously just one person, so she's not there writing lots of applications, but she is able to kind of offer support and advice in terms of avenues to sort of explore down. And as an organisation, we do check and challenge. So we do, if someone else writes an application and wants it checked before it's submitted, we can sort of help guide with that. And it's so there's some support out there that kind of can help identify the right things, because I think one of the challenges is doing a lot of applications. It's a bit like going for a new job. Sometimes you write a lot of applications to, and you get very few interviews at the end of it. It's the same kind of process. There's a lot going into what is a much smaller pot of recipients at the other end of it. But I would say there's far more out there than you probably realise for small organisations.
Thank you. Lorna, sorry, you just picked up on something that was in another question, and I might actually go to Chris as well for this. So it was a question about submitting applications and submitting many applications and getting quite a lot of rejections. So Chris, I know you mentioned this in your presentation as well. So they were asking about support on writing and submitting bids. So I was just wondering if you could give a bit more information on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of our, I guess, our core services, and one of the things we get our volunteers and our staff to do, is if any members have applications that they are writing or want sense checking, or even just support on completing, because obviously we're all aware of how much work goes into these applications, and just a fresh pair of eyes over them can often help and make the difference. So we offer that as part of our core service. And to that point around CICs, many of our members are CICs and do have challenges obviously accessing funding, and we do work with those groups and support them where possible to potentially alter their governance structures that allow them to access more funding if that is what works. For some, obviously that won't be the case, but we can provide a bespoke funding search as well through one of our core services, so we can start to identify things that are available to those groups who maybe struggle with eligibility elsewhere. That's
great, thank you. Warren, sorry, I cut you off. Is there anything you wanted to add to the initial question?
No, well, there's plenty of offers of support there. Just to Ulrika, I don't know, I guess, is the answer in terms of the detail of the eligibility criteria, but some of the things that Ulrika mentions there around cleaning material, extra classes, hall hire, and they are part of the kind of the ethos of the Return to Play Fund. I just don't know the detail of the eligibility criteria, but there will be opportunities for her to either check on the website or ask colleagues within that link in terms of the more specific eligibility criteria.
Great, thank you. I might stick with you, Warren, just for one other question. So there was a question around covering the loss of income for leisure centres. They've heard that this is available, but they're unsure on the application process. Just wondering if you have more information.
Yes, well, not a great deal. Yes, it was announced a few weeks ago now. I can't remember the date, around the 100 million that would be available. I again had a quick trawl around as part of today to see if I could find the latest position, and I'm not sure there is one yet. I do know from a discussion about a week ago that it's still in the pipe. Discussions are ongoing with government around the detail, and it will be announced soon, but I don't know exactly what the time frame for that is. or kind of any further detail. But yeah, it is there. It's great that Lisa's mentioned it so that others on the call who may not have seen that will be aware, and detail will emerge. And if on the government website, when I looked earlier, it does talk about details to be announced and will be available on this page, etc. So sorry not to answer your question, Lisa, but yeah, thanks for raising it, and maybe forget Lisa's details when I do hear about it. I can make sure, you know, ping it straight through to her.
Great, thank you. Okay, and then just to go to, so we'll move away from funding for a bit, unless there's any other questions that come through. So there's another question on the Q&A, which actually brings up an interesting point. So it's from Delphine, who is not part of a community organisation, so she works in the private sector, so feels a little bit separate from the community sector. They have an outside facility which could help with organisations for sport, but they don't know the needs around them. So how can they kind of collaborate with the community sports sector? So yeah, so I might put this to Chris first to see what you think.
Yeah, no problem. I think I wish there were more people like Delphine who can engage with the sector and help out organisations that are working in sport and maybe don't have access to those facilities. I think I say recommendation, I would be happy to just pick up an initial conversation with Delphine separately through the email address that was listed previously, because we can help identify some groups maybe in that area around her that can look at this. But I know it also speaks to a lot of work that Lorna's doing around this displacement of groups from their facilities or their previous facilities. But I would encourage more people to look at the spaces that they have available to them and encourage them to look around them and look at groups, even small community organisations who could make use of that space. But yeah, maybe Lorna wants to add a little bit more just around the displacement part as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was along the same lines of Chris. I was just like, would love any organisation that wants to do that to kind of put their hand up. And I think what I would say firstly to anyone who's kind of looking at this stuff is, if you want to do something within sport and don't know how to do it, that's what organisations like London Sport are for. It's to ask us that this is the thing we want to do, and one of the things we do is if we can't directly answer it, so if you wanted to open up your spaces for the local community and it wasn't something we do, and it is, then what we can do is signpost you to the kinds of organisations that can do that with you. So I think that would be my ask to any organisation that is like, I want to do this and I don't know how to do it within sport and physical activity. Ask us so we can help direct you, because there's definitely a way to make pretty much everything happen. In terms of connecting to the community around you, I mean, I'd say a good starting point is, you know, if you know you want to be working with young people and the organisations that exported support, then go straight to Chris and definitely go down that avenue. If you're still not certain and there's sort of bits and pieces you want to discuss in terms of the sort of more technical side of things and exactly what is my area like and what are the programs and things in place, and get a sort of broader picture to then narrow down what you want to do, then that's the kind of support that the relationship management team that I head up are able to do. Their job is to sort of be able to connect all the pieces on a local level. So it depends on where the organisation is as to which member of the team that would be, but we can definitely help support that. And you know, we're not at the moment, but we're in the same building as Sported, so we're definitely able to work together to support that work to take place.
Great, thank you. So we've had a few questions around after the 2nd of December. Obviously, again, we don't know exactly what the restrictions are going to look like, but hopefully we can give some recommendations. So there's been questions on what can we do to keep children and young people active once the Christmas holidays start, if leisure facilities can't reopen by that time. So Warren, you obviously mentioned a bit of this in your presentation, so I wonder if you could go into a little bit more detail on available resources and things like that.
Yeah, I've not quite read the question that's in the chat, but yeah, around the kind of the children's. Well, first of all, yeah, absolutely recognise it's a huge challenge. all of the data that I mentioned, some of the research there says that children are significantly less active than they were, this time last year. And I think Chris mentioned the issue around inequality and growing inequality. And again, the data really simple to kind of play around with, so you can see any local nuances. But I just jotted a few points down. I think if you're from a less affluent family, you're twice as likely to have done nothing at all as if you're from a more affluent family. If you're from a BAME background, you're again twice as likely as if you're from a white background to have done nothing at all. So don't dispute at all that it's a huge challenge around keeping children active at this time, and the data endorses that. I think just in terms of some of the things that we're doing, I think colleagues who are working directly on the campaigns will be thinking about what does that mean in terms of a national campaign around Christmas, New Year, keeping children active, building on join the movement and keeping the nation active. Is there something specifically we need to do around children and around winter? So those considerations are going on. Just one thing that I've picked out is there's a big correlation between children being inactive and parents being active. So I think it's not necessarily solely focused on children. I think it's about messaging is around, will have to be around getting the family active, because that has a direct, obviously, impact on children as well. And there's also a lot of stuff within the autumn and winter toolkit that I mentioned. So there's information in there in specifically on children as well as adults and other groups, and around how you can develop local campaigns using some assets, some resources, some good practice around how to encourage children to be active. But yeah, there's no magic bullet, I don't think, but it is a focus within the organisation, and again within our strategy, children and young people, one of the absolute key priorities emerging from that.
Great. Lorna, Chris, would either of you like to add anything? No worries. So again, just thinking about what can be done now and also beyond the 2nd of December. There's a question around online delivery, and Chris, you mentioned this. It's quite an interesting one around how can we support beneficiaries who are clinically vulnerable and less keen or able to engage in digital delivery, or perhaps a bit apprehensive of it, and also then again apprehensive of in-person work if lockdown finishes. So for example, the elderly or those with mental or learning difficulties or disabilities. So how can we best support those most vulnerable? So I'll go to Chris first, see what you think. Just because you mentioned online delivery in your presentation.
Yeah, and I think so most of our members, if not all of them, tend to focus on children and young people, but I think the general principles probably still apply. And mostly that's focused on user focus or beneficiary focus, participant focus, however you want to phrase it, and finding out the most appropriate and most effective way to engage with them, have that conversation would be my immediate suggestion, and find a way that works for them that they're comfortable with. I appreciate that it is not, there's not a simple, and to use a phrase that Warren used earlier, a golden bullet for it, but it's just a matter of having that open, honest conversation and finding a way that works.
Yeah. Lorna, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, there's a few bits and pieces that I think it would be good to add at this when I cover this. So I talked about earlier there being lots and lots of different options out there and trying to work out exactly what it is you need for your scenario, and this is one of those scenarios. So firstly, I think just to be reassuring and rattle off a few things, pretty much all of which there will be links to through Sport England's pages, but there are options out there. So funding pre-lockdown had gone into supporting active ageing funded projects, so older people, and some of the stuff that's in there is to do with radio access, so radio programs that you can just turn on the radio and follow along, so you're not watching it online, you haven't got to have a digital access, you can do it through that. There are also various different products where it's a phone call that you make. So you're phoning a number and they talk you through the exercises and you can do them there and then. And not all digital online means you've got to be on a Zoom call and do an activity as you go along. There's lots of sort of bits and pieces that can be accessed in different ways, or once you've got it, you can kind of use it differently. So one of the Sports Tech Hub products that we've used with our young people through satellite clubs is they can take videos off sort of YouTube of coaches delivering sessions, or coaches can develop them themselves, and they basically add AI over the top of it. So they sort of say, this is how this part of the body should move, this is how this part of the body should move as you're doing this activity. The young people can then just have that downloaded to their phones. They haven't got to keep going online, they just have it on their phone, and they can, anytime they want, do the activity and get coaching through the video. I'm moving my elbow in the same way the video is moving my elbow, and it will do that for them. So it's quite technical, but it's, once you've got it, you don't have to be online again, so you're not using that data side of things. There is also, which has been done quite a lot across the country, but also, again, a couple of our satellite clubs did it, is buying equipment for people who don't have that equipment and giving them cards that they can follow instructions on how to do it. So they haven't got to go online at all, they haven't got to download anything, but they are being provided with the items they don't have. And we've seen that kind of stuff happen through people that are sort of providing food banks, have also started providing equipment. So I think there's lots of ways to solve the problem. And the biggest thing I'd say, which includes that sort of question about what do we do for young people over the Christmas holidays, is ask the participants what they need, and they will tell you what their problem is, what their challenge is, and what they need to overcome it. Don't try and guess. They'll know better than anyone else what they need.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to end that point. So we've had a question on the Q&A, which I totally appreciate why they're asking this question, but I don't think we'll be able to answer, but I will put it to you guys just in case. So based on your current understanding, do you feel the government will keep to the 3rd of December as a reopening time, or will they extend the lockdown? Any thoughts?
I feel like we should all put a bet on this.
I know, yeah. I think it
says, who knows is the answer to that question. It will be dependent on what happens with the current situation, whether this makes any difference or not, I guess.
Yeah, I wish we could answer, but I don't think we can realistically. Yes, Warren.
Yeah, absolutely no idea is the answer, but I guess I think the discussion, and again, I'm not directly involved with them, but I think the discussions with colleagues at Sport England is whenever we come out of national lockdown, whether it's the 3rd or whether it's extended, the expectation is there'll be some form of tiered lockdown. So I think the discussions within Sport England and DCMS, and I'm sure other national partners as well, are around preparing for that, and how can we kind of get on the front foot with that. And we know it will be different in a tiered approach, inevitably. So what does that mean? How can we? And then the guidance becomes more confusing, and then the response and what we can do. So I think that's it's a good question, but I think actually the priority is more around whenever we come out, what does that look like, and what do we all need to do as a sector to kind of to respond as quickly as possible to that. Learning from some of the kind of challenges we had before, where in tier 3 Liverpool's gyms weren't allowed to be open but Manchester were, and how do we kind of avoid that kind of scenario. So I think that's probably more where the effort and energy is, rather than exactly when, which will be out of our hands.
Yeah, thank you. So there's a very specific question about tennis. Warren, I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer, but I will put this to you to see what you think. So they're asking, why is one-to-one tennis coaching not allowed? Is there any likelihood of this being permitted after the lockdown finishes? And is there any funding for tennis coaches who are set up as limited companies?
I don't know about the funding one, other than that, again, we have our kind of return to play. But yeah, clearly tennis isn't permitted at the moment, and I don't know whether that's a government decision rather than a kind of a Sport England decision. I think colleagues within Sport England and the national will be taking information from the national governing bodies. I'm sure the LTA will be one of those who are kind of asking the question of government as to what and again, I go back to the tiered answer. I think it's as much about kind of in the tiered scenario, what can we, how can we support government in ensuring that we're safe, as many methods of getting people active as possible in a safe way are done. So I think that's where our focus is. I can't answer on any specific sports and what will be in the next phase or not, but I think that will be part of the kind of the tiered response. When we open at whatever level, how do we make that as accessible as possible? I probably should stop saying it there.
Great, we've only got a couple of minutes left, but
Lauren, sorry, can I just add to the tennis question? This is one of those ones where I would say go to the national agency that predominantly deals with this. So I would check UK Coaching and all of the guidance they've got about the different kinds of coach that you might be. And I don't mean tennis, swimming, I mean with your a limited company, etc., and see if they have got guidance available for you, and they will probably have a contact point as well if you've got a question that's more technical than the answers they've got.
Great, thank you. So yeah, we've only got a couple of minutes left. There's one more comment in the Q&A. It's not really a question, but I just want to say we haven't ignored you. So it's just around the reality that community organisations are facing and how it's very misunderstood, both from funders and from the government, which we totally appreciate, and we are taking that on board for sure. It's one of the reasons that we're holding webinars like this to understand what's actually going on for community organisations on the ground, but it's also why we're working together as a group, as a coordination group, to try and better approach the issues that we know that community sport organisations are facing, and we are hoping to kind of get out there and understand a bit more from you all as well. So we're not ignoring that comment, we do totally take it on board, so thank you for sending that through. So yes, unfortunately we only have 1 minute left, but we got through all the questions, so thank you very much. I really appreciate all your time, really appreciate your questions. Thank you again to Lorna, Warren and Chris, and also obviously to all of you as our guests. If you do have any questions that we missed, or that you have any questions that you thought of afterwards, or you weren't comfortable asking them in the context of this public discussion, please do contact us directly by emailing, I think Chris put it into the webinar chat, the email address, or it's events@LondonSport, and we'll obviously review those and then come back to you personally. And we really appreciate your feedback as well, so please do tell us what you think. I think there's going to be a Twitter poll. Yes, that's on the chat as well, so thank you for that. And again, this session has been recorded and it will be subtitled and posted on the London Sport website shortly. So thank you very much. I'll speak to you all soon.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody.